Hey everyone, it's Franchise Horror Reviews, and today I'm bringing you an unorthodox style of video. This video is going to be one of 3 videos I plan on making in reviewing the Halloween franchise. Now, I'm going to be the first to say the Halloween franchise probably should never have been 13 films, if you ask me. I think where the Halloween franchise really started to lose favor for me personally was the 5th film moving onward. And while there are some movies that I have really responded well to, and a lot of films that have grown on me, some have grown off of me in this franchise, I do have a lot of nostalgia for these movies. I want that to be perfectly clear. Halloween is my favorite time of year, it's my favorite holiday. And that goes without saying that these movies were an integral part of my childhood. Each and every Halloween, especially when I was younger, when I would go trick-or-treating, I would come home, I would collect my candy, and I would sit down and put on whatever station had a Halloween movie on, and I would watch. And mainly, I watched the first 6 films, and sometimes H2O and Resurrection. Now, when I got out of trick-or-treating, that's when the Rob Zombie movies kicked on. That's when Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 kicked on. And then years later, as an adult, the Blumhouse trilogy came out. And I can honestly say I like a movie from each individual timeline, except for one. So yeah, this video is essentially me declaring the 3 worst films in the franchise. So the first film is going to center around the 3 worst films in the franchise. The second installment of this will be the middle 5 movies of the franchise. And then the final one is going to be my top 5 of the entire franchise. So without further ado, let's start off with dead last. At number 13, we have Halloween Resurrection. If I can describe this movie in one word, is that it's an abomination. Abomination. Whenever I think of this movie, I think of wasted potential. This movie has a lot of cult followers for some reason who like the funniness to it, who thinks that it's kind of aware with how bad it is, and that's fair, and you can make that argument all you want. But for me, I think this movie should have just never existed. This movie really reflects why this movie was made in the first place. This just feels like this movie was made to be a movie as a placeholder to keep film rights for Dimension Studios back in the day. Now, since this movie was released in 2002, there are a lot of Y2K influences on this film, primarily dealing with films like Blair Witch Project, also the realm of the internet rising in, pop culture relevance, and also at the same time reality television. So you have all these 3 things coming together in this film, which on paper should make this film great, but it doesn't. What I'm referring to is the Dangertainment angle this movie has. And Dangertainment is this production company wanting to use the Michael Myers home as a stage set to film a reality horror movie type of thing to stream it on the internet. And they recruit these group of kids from college, the local Haddonfield College, to stay and spend the night in the Michael Myers home, to which the 2 producers, led by Busta Rhymes and Tyra Banks, a rapper and a supermodel with 0 to no acting experience, planned this event and planted all these little traps and, stage pieces inside of the now condemned Michael Myers home to scare the college students to make good TV. Now, coinciding with this, there's a plot convergence that we learn in the beginning of the film that involves Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. And off the get-go, if you're a fan of H2O, you're probably going to hate the first 10 to 15 minutes of this movie, because this movie retcons the ending of H2O, which a lot of people consider the best send-off this franchise has ever seen, and puts Laurie into a sanitarium. She now has either elected herself to be in there to either trap Michael Myers, or she's put in there because Michael Myers faked his death. It's never really expounded on. And it doesn't really make sense why she's in there. But all that matters is that Michael has now found Laurie inside of this sanitarium and is trying to hunt her down and kill her. And he manages to do just that. Yes, Laurie Strode gets killed by Michael, and the whole movie is set up to be a direct sequel to H2O, which retcons its ending. And we get that within the first 10 to 15 minutes. It's utter bullshit, if you ask me. It's so disrespectful to the legacy of the character of Laurie Strode. I don't care if Jamie Lee Curtis wanted her to die because she didn't want to do this movie, but she was there for contractual obligations. There's other ways you could put Laurie Strode in the movie, either in the final 15 minutes, maybe she was watching Dangertainment or something, and she could have come to help the college students. That could have been better, a little contrived, but I digress. And that goes without saying that this movie really bitches Michael out hard. A lot of things done with Michael here in this movie feels kind of like Scooby-Doo. Not in the sense that he gets unmasked and treated like a kid's cartoon, but he's definitely treated like the butt of the joke of the entire movie. Mainly by the expense of his lore, by the producers who are using him as not a serious entity, but something to glorify and make money off of. And then on top of that, the producer, played by Busta Rhymes, is a kung fu loving guy, and he pretty much makes Michael look like a bitch. He has this personality where he's really brash and he cusses a lot. And you see Michael get cursed out on screen. You see him get manhandled and kicked out of a window and made him look like a bitch. And then the final scene is the nail in the coffin, where you have Michael get hung up in wires because Busta Rhymes is playing Mortal Kombat with him, and Busta Rhymes electrocutes Michael in his balls. Yes, that happens, in case you haven't seen the movie. But if you wanted to pick any better way to emasculate Michael Myers, it's doing that. For a little compliments I want to give this movie, a lot of the compliments stem to Rick Rosenthal. Stemming back to my comment about it feeling like Scooby-Doo, I really like that Rick Rosenthal provided an ambiance in this movie, and this set that was constructed to be the Myers home does have this childhood connection to Michael Myers, and I think that even in the worst case, if you're a diehard Michael Myers fan, or you like brutal Michael Myers, this movie will make you connect to your childhood fandom of Michael Myers, especially if you've been a fan since you were a kid. See, growing up, this movie would play a lot, and I would watch this movie a lot just because it had Michael Myers in it. And albeit it was more targeted to me, I feel, because this movie is one of the few that can honestly be PG-13, but at the same time, this atmosphere reminded me a lot of the stuff I was watching, like Scooby-Doo or Goosebumps. It was more kid-friendly than your average Halloween movie. And for that, I can really appreciate it. Some of the comedy really lands, either intentional or not, and I'm not gonna lie, the trick-or-treat motherfucker line from Busta Rhymes is absolute gold. If you had one iconic one-liner from this franchise, it's that. I would love to get that put on a t-shirt. And another thing that I kind of enjoy is just that this movie as a whole feels different from the franchise, despite it being really terrible. And what makes this movie really unbearable isn't really the treatment of Laurie and Michael. It's more that the characters we are made to, care about, you don't care about them. You want them to die. They're cardboard characters. They have no connection to any of the previous films. This arguably could be the standalone film of the franchise if they really wanted to. But why the fuck did they tie this into H2O? It's beyond me. It's frustrating because the actors are all pretty much nobodies and they play cardboard characters and their acting really sucks. And this stems down to the script writing too. And it's not just the treatment of Michael, it's not just the treatment of Laurie, it's the absolute trash script. And then when you have nobody actors and you have a rapper, you have a supermodel, and then the most well-known actor in this movie is from your American Pie movies a few years beforehand, you got a shitstorm on your hand. The mask and look of Michael Myers is really good, and that's also a saving grace compared to the film before it. I think this is a huge step up from the mask and look of Michael from what we got in H2O. But all said and done, this movie is just a wild storm of blandness, carelessness, and disrespect. And for that, it fucking is terrible, and it should definitely be deserved at the bottom spot for a lot of you out there, especially you diehard fans. At number 12, we have probably my most hated film in the franchise, even though I don't think it's as bad as number 13, and it's Halloween 5: The Revenge of Michael Myers. I'm going to get this off my chest. I'm a massive fan of Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers. What they did in that movie was really special to me, even though it's more or less doing the first movie over, but with a new spin on it, and keeping true to that mysticism of Michael that was in Halloween 1 and Halloween 2. Halloween 5 throws mysticism out the door and immediately throws you into what is called the Cult of Thorn and Man in Black ideology, shit that we had to deal with in this fucking movie. Revenge of Michael Myers was a rush job of a movie. It didn't have any clear direction to follow up for. In case you didn't know, the director Dominique Othenin-Girard really expedited this movie getting made because he went to Mustafa Akkad and essentially begged Mustafa Akkad to get the ability to make this movie. And albeit Akkad didn't want to do it, he was willing to do it for a lower price and was willing to get it done within a time frame, so Akkad agreed. Now, Dominique Othenin-Girard, if you're watching, I want to say this straight to you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. I hate what this motherfucker did to Michael Myers, the direction they took with Michael Myers, what they did to Jamie Lloyd and Rachel Carruthers are unforgivable. And fuck all of these side characters and the comedy and stupid music this movie also introduces. From the get-go, we notice that Michael has survived the events of 4, which is to be implied. But the way he survives is fucking stupid as hell. He ends up passing out for an entire year in this homeless person's hut for no fucking reason. And when he wakes up, we get a pan shot on his wrist, and there's a symbol, which we later on learn in this fucking movie is the Cult of Thorn symbol. Now, this pagan type of tattoo gets expounded on in that movie, but this movie really doesn't fucking try to explain it, and it's not worth mentioning any further than what I just said. Now, as the movie goes on, Michael in this terrible mask that looks like Uncle Fester with pulled back, slick back mullet is just fucking awful. And the way he moves, I think this Michael Myers is played by, what's his name? Don Shanks. Doesn't give a bad performance under the mask, but man oh man does this mask really take away from Don Shanks' performance. Just another thing to add to the list that this movie fucks up. And almost immediately, we get a sense that Jamie and the psychic connection that might have been alluded to in the 4th film is not Othenin's concern, and it's never expounded on, even in this fucking movie later on. And this is the last time we see that bit of Jamie and Michael's implied relationship thing going on from the 4th movie, because he wanted to focus on just making a parodic horror movie. Now, some people might think that this movie has some charm and has some funniness to it because it's making fun and lambasting slasher movies of the 80s. But you can do that, but not in the second movie of a intended reboot that took years to get off the ground. It's beyond me. The bizarre choices here are really staggering. Let's start off with Jamie being mute for half the fucking movie. The psychic connection I've already brought up does not get expounded on at all from this movie or moving forward. Rachel Carruthers is one of the first fucking deaths in this movie, and it just is so disrespectful to that character because she's obviously one of the best characters this franchise had ever seen, up until that point. And then, of course, on top of that, we get introduced to the worst final girl in slasher movie history, Tina. And Tina, the actress who plays Tina, and her ragtag group of friends, who are also all terrible actors and terrible characters, really don't fucking matter. And you really grow to hate them in this movie, and you want them to fucking die. Which can be fun, and it is fun in a group setting. I have watched this movie in a group setting, and it is fun to cheer for their deaths and root for them when they die. But I digress. Going to Dr. Loomis now, he's now become a raving lunatic. And he's grown disconnected because of the events of 4, which is understandable. But he's also grown really creepy and really just downright stupid. And that's mainly the best adjective I can describe this movie. It does nothing coherent to add to the story that 4 had brought up. And it introduces two things, like I've already brought up the Cult of Thorn tattoo, but there's this cameo in this character in this movie we call the Man in Black. And we do not meet the Man in Black until this fucking movie. And it's clear that this movie had no idea what the fuck it was doing. It just had annoying characters, ruined legacy characters from 4 off the jump, had just no direction until the final act of the movie, where then, all of a sudden, it decides to speed run the first movie over again inside of the Myers home, and did have a memorable ending, and I do praise it for that. But other than that part of the movie, the rest of this is garbage. It's utter garbage. And then the final scene is a cliffhanger where Michael's sitting in the jail at Haddonfield Police Station, where the previous film, he massacred an entire police force. Why the fuck would you take Michael Myers to the police station, the exact same location where he massacred an entire police force just a year prior? Just a bunch of idiotic shit. When we're talking about the music, when the cops in this movie come around, there's like two cops that you see, they get like clownish music played. Tina's dialogue is really bad. It's down to the script, the music score, the fucking characters, kind of similar to Resurrection. It's all an abomination as well. I mean, the treatment of Michael is way better. He doesn't come off like a bitch in this movie, and that's the reason why I put this above Resurrection. But his mask is fucking awful. His mask is terrible. And he doesn't really have much else going for him in this movie, and really nothing adds to Michael's lore in this movie other than he has a fucking tattoo on his wrist, and it doesn't even try to explain that. This movie's fucking hot garbage. It's definitely deserving of my bottom 3, and it's one of the 2 I really hate, next to Resurrection. Now, number 11, I want to stress this. I don't really hate this movie, but I strongly dislike it and think that it's the most overrated Halloween movie in the entire franchise. Yes, I'm going to be the bad guy here. I'm going to say that in my last of the bottom 3, we have Halloween H2O 20 years later. On paper, after seeing the events of the Cult of Thorn trilogy, I like that we go back to Laurie Strode and see what she's been up to in an alternate timeline. Now, the timeline that this movie creates is a timeline where the first film, the second film, and now this film are supposed to be one conclusive and coherent timeline, which, after watching this movie, it's not coherent at all. Let's start off with Laurie Strode. Laurie Strode is out in California, being in the witness protection program. She went in there after the events of the night of Halloween 2, where she escapes in the ambulance. She started a new life under a new alias. She's now a head dean or, whatever at this private school out in California. And it's revealed that she has a 17-year-old son named John. Now, she's become overprotective of her son John because she's spent the past 20 years before just being stricken with PTSD about the night of Michael Myers terrorizing the town of Haddonfield, scaring the shit out of her and killing all of her friends. This is also the first film we don't see Dr. Loomis because Donald Pleasence had passed away during the filming of Curse of Michael Myers years prior, and I think that absence really shows as well. Beyond the point, I don't have any issue with Jamie Lee Curtis's performance as Laurie Strode. I don't have any issues with Josh Hartnett's performance as her son John. This was his first film, and he did a great job. Michelle Williams plays John's girlfriend. Jodie Lynn O'Keefe plays one of the friends in the ragtag group. And this other guy, I recognize him as the child Alan Parrish from Jumanji. Is also in this movie. And they're all passable, kind of stock like most of the characters I've already touched on in my bottom two before it. They're not really memorable, but at least they're not forgettable. Going from that, I think that where this movie really fails being coherent to the first two movies, like everybody thinks it's really tied to, is that Michael Myers was, last time we saw him in this timeline apparently, he was engulfed in flames at Haddonfield Hospital at the end of 2. Well, in the start of this film, Michael Myers comes back, but we have no fucking idea how he survived because it's never mentioned. Now, I think this setup would work if it was an anthology type of setup, and this was a complete standalone Michael Myers film, but since it's predicated on being a direct sequel to Halloween 2, you would think that they would fucking add that in. But I digress. So, Michael comes in, off-screen kills 2 teenagers in a nearby town of Langdon, Illinois, trying to find Marion Chambers, who we saw in the first 2 Halloween films in the timeline. And he tries to get a file from her house, and he succeeds. He kills Marion Chambers, and her death is the first on-screen death of this film. And it's not really that good or spectacular, but we also see Michael's best mask in this entire movie. As the movie progressively goes on, it's about... Michael's not even in majority of this movie in the first and second act. He's supposed to be in a car driving across the country from Illinois to California to get to Laurie, and there's no killing going on whatsoever. So the entire movie is played on pretty much drama and character-driven narratives, which are really flat and boring. The only interesting elements with these characters in the majority of this movie is that Laurie doesn't want her son to go on this trip to Yosemite on Halloween because she's really protective of him and wants to keep him safe. However, a lot of stuff is very forced, dealing with how some of the characters get to stay behind, and they're going to be the only 4 students at the school, and Jamie Lee Curtis and Alan Arkin, who is her boyfriend in this movie, are going to be the only teachers staying behind. And then LL Cool J, the night watch and the security officer who works the front gate, is also in and out of this movie. I don't know why they chose LL Cool J, but I definitely think they wasted his character here too. His character was kind of entertaining, and I would have loved to see more of him. Now, when this movie finally does start to kick on, Michael Myers ends up finally at this school. And when we see Michael Myers throughout beforehand, we saw him in visions with Laurie. And seeing the first mask from the very first scene to some of the masks that Laurie sees in like some of the cinematography and some of the vision scenes in this movie, it looks like a shedding of Clay Aiken's face, and then the other one looks like Shrek with a black wig. These masks look fucking terrible, and the look of Michael looks fucking awful. Primarily because you see his fucking eyes bulge out of the mask. Now, one gripe I have with this movie that nobody ever fucking brings up, if this movie is indeed a straight up follow-up to the second Halloween movie, do you not remember that Michael Myers was in the hospital in that room when Laurie Strode shot him in the fucking eyes? Both of his eyes. Looking at this movie, you see Chris Duran, who plays Michael Myers, and you see his eyes bulge out of these fucking masks. And there's no scarring, there's no bullet holes, bullet scars. He looks fresh. Why? Why would you have his eyes exposed like that if you didn't want to show his eyes to begin with? And on top of that, when he does show his eyes, he looks like he's fucking just got hit in the fucking balls by Laurie. And every scene you see is fucking eyeballs. I think Chris Duran really takes down the third act of this film, which is easily the best part of it, because he looks terrible. Majority of this final act goes back between the Clay Aiken mask and the Shrek mask, and then there's even a fucking CGI mask, for God's sake. In the kills we do see, there's an off-screen kill. Jodie Lynn O'Keefe's kill is pretty brutal. She fucks her leg up real bad and looks disgusting, but she also gets killed off-screen. And then Alan Arkin's character, Laurie's boyfriend, gets killed the same exact way that we saw the nurse character die in the hallway of Halloween 2. It has the least amount of kills, the least intimidating presence of Michael ever, and it's very contradictory because at one point he holds himself on a fucking pipe like Spider-Man, and then next, Laurie's manhandling him and shoving him off a fucking balcony and making him look like a complete bitch, this is the first trend next to the first original film where Michael really feels like he's not a super fucking human. Halloween 2 really contradicts the feeling of the first Michael Myers as well, but that's beyond the point here. I want to stress that this movie is really a tale of three halves. The first half is really dull, makes no sense, but also kind of feels like Scream because Kevin Williamson's tied to this movie, and it is kind of entertaining. The middle act of this movie is really where the snooze fest happens. There is no Michael Myers. It's completely driven by character narratives, and the character narratives are boring and uninteresting and very surface level and never explore too deep. And I think the 85-minute runtime is really fleshed out by this 30-minute final act, which is honestly really great and one of the highlight moments of this entire franchise. But like I said, Michael looks terrible. LL Cool J's character is one of the surviving characters, but he gets wasted off. Josh Hartnett and his girlfriend drive off, and it's just Laurie and Michael for the final 10 minutes. And not to mention, the look of Michael's just fucking awful, and when the kill of Michael happens, it looks stupid as hell, but it serves a powerful punch, which is supposed to leave the movie off on a good hand, but as we know, Resurrection happened and retconned that ending and just completely ruined it. So all said and done, I think this movie is the most overrated movie in the Halloween franchise. It really does not make any coherent connection to the first two films like people think it does. And it's just really boring. And Michael looks terrible, and he's treated like a bitch. Good moments with Laurie, some good characters. I would have loved to see John's character come back in Resurrection, but given that this movie turned out the way it did, I'm not shocked he didn't want to return. I know this is a fan-revered one, but fuck it, I don't care. It's in my bottom 3. So yeah, let me know down in the comment section, what are your bottom 3 Halloween movies? I'm dying to know. Next video is going to be the middle 5 of the franchise for me. Take care.